Welcome to Getting to Know You. It's a beautiful spring day, and I can say, when faces called flowers flow out of the ground, when every leaf opens without any sound, we can rejoice. Does that sound familiar? I have people with me who really know poetry, and that's one of my favorites from E. Cummings. But we're here today, not just to talk about poetry, but with Hella and Scott McVay, who have, for the last nearly 40 years, have wanted to get poetry to the people, not just in the books like we see around us, but accessible and sort of surprising to people to enjoy poetry. So that's what we want to celebrate, the two of you, because it is National Poetry Month, along with Earth Day and a whole lot of other things. So here we are, and I'd like to tell your story. You live here at Stonebridge, and what has it been, about a year, 2 years that you've been here?
2 years and a couple of
2 years,
days.
2 years,
Yeah.
okay. And you continue every day, basically, to live that, getting poetry to the people. But I would like to have you meet them in that special thing that they've done that takes very ordinary things as well as the beauty of poetry. Having the imagination to figure out how to do it, managing it, bringing people together, filming it, inspiring it, and so this is celebrating you in National Poetry Month. So I'm going to start with something that you started and that Hella was there to admire and participate in. When you were the president of the Dodge Foundation, you, I guess, invented the Dodge Poetry Festival.
Yes, after meeting with Stanley Kunitz and Galway Canal, they coached us to think big. They said, you can create the biggest poetry festival on earth. It turned out to be a 4-day affair. I hired a fellow named Jim Hava, who was teaching here in the state, and he loved poetry like nobody I'd ever met. And so at the end of the first festival in 1986, Hava was exhausted. It's 3 nights, and then the 4th night, he said to me late Sunday afternoon, he says, "Are we going to do this every year?" I said, "Every other year."
Right.
And so his shoulders dropped an inch. So it's been every other year now for since that time. And we started in Waterloo Village, remote.
You gave that prominence.
Yeah, I wanted to get
Right.
away from the academic flagpole because tenured faculty tend to fold their arms and fall asleep. But if you get far enough away from the academy, it can really be received.
Right.
And actually, in the span of my tenure at Dodge, we had 26 hours on PBS of these festivals, 21 hours by Bill Moyers
Wow. Yeah.
in three successive series, 6, 8, and 6. And so we reached actually 60 million people. Well, this leads to a lot more poetry out there, a lot more exposure. It leads to more poetry, some of it very, very good, and some of it not so good.
Well, that's for others to decide. We won't get into that.
No, we
then.
won't.
But the Poetry Festival then made it possible for what, 20 poets to, over the course of the time, different backgrounds and so on.
Oh my God, from all over the world.
And an audience that was similarly diverse, right?
Oh,
Yes.
and the last,
You were in the audience, Ellen.
always in the audience. Oh my goodness, yes. The last one, now it moved to Newark, there were students, 1,500 students came from all the way from Florida, and people from Central America and on and on. It was unbelievable, unbelievable. And my poet, every other year, now she's dead unfortunately, was Lucille Clifton from Buffalo. A beautiful, mama-like African American woman. And I must say, she always gave me the nicest hug. And I think I was well all these years because she hugged me every 2 years.
Scott, can you say a little something about both how you reached the poets. What kind of a net did you throw out? And then how did you reach the audience? Somehow you did it very well, because I was very much aware of the Poetry Festival happening. But those are two things that have to come together very well.
Well, let me say.
You were like a talent scout or something.
Well, it is kind of interesting. For example, in 1992, we had Rita Dove. The next year, she happened to become Poet Laureate of the United States, first African American. She's still at the University of Virginia, has a German husband who's quite a well-known novelist in German. And they were in and out of the White House during all the Clinton years.
They visited us quite a bit.
And so, for example,
teachers played a big role through schools.
oh yeah, there would be a day for teachers, and there was a day for students, and then the weekend was kind of open to anybody and everybody, but we'd get huge attendances, and then this multiplier effect out there reaching through these 27 films,
Right.
reaching 60 million people is our best estimate. And by the way, we sent teacher guides to every high school English teacher in the country, every one. And so,
Got guides about poetry, being a poet, or?
Yeah.
no, it's about how to look at this thing and think about this particular poet. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah.
For example, in 1992, how did we celebrate Columbus, 500 years? We invited 5 Native American poets to speak. And they all have become, they become major
Right.
figures in their own tribes.
Right.
And another time, we had a bunch of poets from Nicaragua, which is probably the most poetically oriented country on earth. And there was one man on the very short list for Nobel. Anyway, so it went on like that, and
So each one was a creative thinking process.
we had
of
a
how
2-year run-up to
Yeah.
make it happen. And
Yeah.
you had major poets, then we had what we called regional poets, which may live in this area, and some of them became Dodge poets, and then they got involved in the spring and fountain work, which oriented the teachers in this area for 6 weeks every spring, and they're going on right now.
Right.
Continuation.
Well, yeah, I think I saw on the website that the Poetry Festival is taking place in an odd year, because they didn't do it last year in
That's correct.
person.
It's all
And
even
it's
years.
starting on April 26th or something.
Yeah.
When I asked you to do
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
I didn't really know that it was happening. So, that's been going on. Your successors have continued. The foundation is proud of what it's done and has supported it. And,
Well, at the beginning, my pitch was this. I had a board, an extremely tolerant, willing, supportive, and bright board, and none of them had much interest in poetry. So I threw up two circles, and I said, let's look at philanthropy nationwide.
Right.
And I broke it down into how everything, and then you look at writing and poetry was a sliver called 2%. It looked like a niche, and then we looked at what we were doing in the arts. We were already at 7%, a very substantial commitment.
Yeah.
Anyway, they said, well, we'll see, and we'll give it a try. And then they kept re-upping, and then it became something they became very proud of, and they came and they brought their kids and spouses and so on.
Right, right.
So it's gone through my 4th successor, Tanuja.
Who came and visited us here.
Yeah, we spent 2 hours with her when she was first chosen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And she said, of course, we're going to stay with poetry.
Right. Well, it's right up there on the,
Namaste.
I checked. It's right up there on the website being out. Well, and also to make that transition from being out in the country in Waterloo and establishing that as a place, and now it's in Newark, and in a beautiful spot that people probably don't know too much about if you haven't been to Newark, to NJPAC and so on.
Well, it's the number one recipient of support from the state, and it was one guy made it all happen, and he was very welcoming.
Okay. All right, now let's go to the second piece, all right? It didn't stop there. Years past, 30 years or something like that.
No,
And,
no, not really. I mean, you know,
well, I'm going by
everything
published.
seems to be a half a century.
Well, I'm talking about the DNR poetry, Greenway Poetry Trail. That's about 30 years apart, or 25 years, in terms of a project that you worked on. And so we're celebrating that too.
Yeah,
And,
it will be 10 years this year in existence, but what happened, I was chairperson of DNR Greenway Board, and with Sam Hamley, years earlier, we had thought that the beautiful barn was a perfect place to have a gallery and to make people aware through the visual aspect of the environment,
Right.
beautiful landscape, and so on. And since I was very involved in that, I thought, now we have gotten, if we are speaking to the people visually, how about verbally? And being married to a poet and having been exposed to poetry for all these years, I thought of creating a poetry trail. Now that poetry trail is on Princeton Township land.
Princeton now.
It's totally
Always,
always
from the
was.
beginning.
Yeah, now that we're combined, right?
No, it always was. And
No, wait, Pella, it was supported by both towns, and it is now a
Town
town park.
exactly.
I mean, the
yeah.
borough put money into it, even
Oh
though
yeah,
it
thank
didn't.
God,
Yes.
thank God. There would have been
Yes.
54
They cut the
mansions.
Yeah, I have to say, when my husband was the
Beautiful.
mayor.
It was it's a beautiful place. And you know, the old sewer, and the barn. Anyhow, so when I mentioned that to my husband, he had instantly 500, 800 poets, and I said, wait a minute, we cannot afford that much, you know.
The
Each
trail
sign-
isn't that long.
No, each sign cut, and we paid for every cent for it, and then also the benches, there are 25 benches by David Robinson, who has
Seven
and
benches.
7 benches, and each cost $25,000. And the same guy who did the work in Central Park, wonderful artist. But we wanted also to stay and give a job to people locally. So we went to Trenton, and a wonderful sign maker helped us doing this. And so we decided on, at that time, 48 signs. And then I worked nearly 2 years on it, because we needed to get permission. All the living poets were delighted to be part of it, but we had to ask the estate and pay a little money for the estate to use some of the poetry and on and on. And then I went to the mayor at that time, Bernie Miller, to make sure that he feels we are not putting up politically incorrect or smutty stuff. And he looked at all of that, and he fell in love with it. When I say, you have a favorite poem, he says, I love the poem from Naomi Shihab-Nye.
Okay, do you want to
And
read
it's only 3 lines.
Okay.
Walk around feeling like a leaf. Now you would tumble any second. Then decide what to do with your time. And she, of course, was a wonderful person who used to come and teach at the Lawrenceville School, PDS, and so on. So we got to know her very well. So, and then the day came that we opened up the poetry trail, and Paul Madure, and Paul Winter, and so many poets came and went, and it was a beautiful event. And David Cole made a movie, the hour-long movie, and so on.
Let me just try and paint a picture, because we had the poetry festival with lots of people coming to a specific place for a specific time, and poets reading. So now we switch to a very different way of a small, relatively small landscape, a pathway, and then a place where people can go at any time and read poetry for themselves. It's a very quiet
That's
thing,
very important.
but it is very open, as much as the poetry festival was open.
Yeah, you see, that you made a very important point. We wanted to reach people, so that meant we selected poetry which were not so esoteric or too abstract, and not too long, of course, because people's attention span.
Well, and you also had,
And,
you in effect had one sheet of
Yeah,
paper.
and so
You
on.
couldn't have-
So, but also because today is Earth Day, relating to nature.
Mhm.
When he is, for instance, and we wanted not just stay with Anglo, we wanted to reach
Right.
the world.
Right,
When he is it's a two-liner from Rumi,
okay,
when I tell a cute little story afterwards. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. One cold February day, ice on the ground, a cute grandma with a 4.5-year-old boy walked by. She read the poem to this boy. He instantly fell to the ground and then, kissed the ice. I mean,
Right.
this is how
it's a
it
very,
speaks.
it's a very personal experience,
Yeah.
but open to anyone. So, I think that we should say that it's very easy to get to from
And
Stonebridge.
free
so-
parking.
Right. If you can get yourself, on 206 going into town, just turn right on Hodge Road, right?
Yeah.
It's on,
And off Rosedale.
it's also, it's Rosedale,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So, it's right near us.
Yeah.
We don't have to go to Newark to the festival. We can have our own little personal festival by going over to the Greenway. You haven't read a poem, Scott. We should give you a chance to sort of end this,
Let me say that the poets, total now of 50, the poets represent 12 different lands and cultures. It's not just Anglo. And the common theme connecting everything is awe and wonder before the natural world. And it turns out there are hundreds, thousands of people say, what is poetry? And,
Right.
Shelley, acknowledged legislators of the world, the poets. But the trail begins, the first poem on the trail, on this main question of what is poetry, is from Octavio Paz, who was at the festival in '88, and he became Nobel laureate from Mexico. Between what I see and what I say, between what I say and what I keep silent, between what I keep silent and what I dream, between what I dream and what I forget, poetry. And then, for example, poetry at its very best is concise, but it illuminates some big idea. You go a couple of steps down the beginning of the poetry trail, and there's a short one line from Walt Whitman, which is, I believe a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars. Now, this is an encapsulation, if you will, of all of Darwin's work
Right.
and others.
and the wonder I think we feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this was the line we had on our first poetry poster. That line, and above it was a work by Tom George, a dear friend, and a great artist and friend.
One more?
Okay. Up on top of the trail, when you get up to the highest place, there's a series of 5 poems by Issa from Japan. They're haikus, and each one is special. We have time for one.
Well, if you have 3 on your piece of paper there, and they're haikus, let's have them.
Don't cry, insects. Even lovers, even stars must say goodbye. These are all translated by Robert Hass, who was poet laureate right after, and the most connected to the earth of all of our poets laureates so far. For you fleas, too, the nights must be long. They must be lonely. That wren, looking here, looking there. You lose something?
Well, Helen, do you have one more that you want to read?
Oh, well, maybe that's too long from Lucille
Yeah.
Clifton, but Gerald Stern, who was a local poet, right, moved out to New York. It's a two-liner. Since you talked about the canal, I walk along the mule path, dreaming of my weaknesses and praying to the ducks for forgiveness.
Wonderful.
Gerald Stern. He was such a sweet guy, and
Yeah.
he came to the opening.
Right. Well, there you have it. We are sitting here being moved by the words of people who we call poets and celebrating it. But I want to thank you both for making the opportunity to enjoy poetry go much further and wider and make it accessible to basically whoever you are in a way that it wasn't before you did your work. So thank you on behalf of National Poetry Month, but also we here at Stonebridge who are happy to have fellow residents making that kind of world available. So, well, that's today for Getting to Know You. Thank you to Hella and Scott McVay, who as partners, I think, have accomplished a lot to make poetry more accessible to many people, including us. And stay tuned. Next week we will have something interesting to talk about again. Thank you very, very much to Scott and Helen. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Ingrid.